catch up with the stream. Thank you so much for joining me. This is going to be really interesting. You might be asking yourself, even if you're a Deadhead, why would anyone claim that the Grateful Dead was the most important cultural phenomena of the 20th century? It sounds like something that some acid-crazed, overzealous Deadhead would say, but I think I can establish for you that it's actually true. And the reality of it is that this psychedelic renaissance that is providing so much inspiration and healing and, you know, awakening of different kinds, and just generally accentuating our lives and giving us so much magic would not be happening if it wasn't for the Grateful Dead. That in and of itself, I think, is unarguable, because when the 70s and the 80s and 90s came, they were the only ones that were really legitimately carrying that torch, the awareness of what it really meant through those decades of shallow, debauched, descent into material madness, day-glow hairspray, and let me see if I can still add this microphone, because otherwise the audio is going to be not as good. Okay, can you guys hear me? Did that work? I can't tell. Somebody let me know in the chat if there's audio. Now that I've added this microphone, I don't know if the phone's going to pick it up. Well, since you guys aren't dropping off, I'm going to assume you can hear me. Not only were the Grateful Dead carrying this torch of psychedelic consciousness through all of these decades where it was otherwise totally lost. Even if you're not a Deadhead, you don't listen to the music, you've never been to a concert, you have been profoundly affected by them, because the energy of those concerts, from the carnival in the parking lot to the show itself, unless the band was off, which was unfortunately a pretty common occurrence, there was something about it that profoundly transformed people, and then those people would go away from the shows, and there's that ripple in still water, right, would pass through them into their family members and friends. And so the band had a profound impact on people all around the world, even if there was no direct contact, which is how magicians work, right? And so, you know, during Garcia's lifetime, they didn't get a tremendous amount of respect. It's not like nowadays where people kind of recognize that the Grateful Dead were, you know, highly skilled musicians, and that they wrote wonderful songs, and that, you know, psychedelics are actually beneficial. Those opinions were sort of not widely held outside of Deadhead circles, you know, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. In fact, it was a good way to suffer a lot of ridicule to be a Deadhead. When I was first starting out as a musician, people would ask me when I joined bands, like, what are your big influences? I really would hesitate to, you know, say the Grateful Dead, because people would just kind of like roll their eyes. And really, if you're only familiar with their studio output, it's kind of understandable. I mean, you know, American Beauty and Working Man's Dead had some great songs, but it basically just sounds like hippies strumming simple chords, and it's really not that exciting. You would never imagine that Garcia was a really, really skilled improvisational guitarist, because there are almost no guitar solos even on their albums. So because most people, associate a band with their studio output, a lot of people really dismiss the Dead, and you would suffer a lot of ridicule. In fact, still to this day, like when I put this link out with the description, and people saw that I had said that, you know, younger people know Jerry Garcia more often than they're aware of John Lennon, and in my opinion, for good reason. But people, you know, from that generation just cannot even believe that that could be possible. But it has indeed happened. And so in this live stream, we're going to talk about why that's happened. In fact, right now, the Grateful Dead surviving members, with the exception of the bass player, are are filling football stadiums. The crowd at Jam in the Sand, I think it's called, in Mexico last year, as far as the eye can see. And if you consider that their star, sorry about the camera, the leg broke, so I'm trying to figure out how to get it oriented so that it looks okay. But okay, that's a little bit better. Jam in the Sand, you can't even see to the end of the audience in Mexico. And if you consider that Garcia, their only like verified rock star, right? Their only bona fide rock star has been dead for 30 years, I think. It's really incredible that they're able to still draw these huge crowds. And so, why is that? Um, well, we're going to talk about that, and it's going to be extremely difficult for me to talk about the Grateful Dead in a 2 hour live stream, honestly, because there's so much history. I have so much personal experience. I was lucky enough to get to know Phil Lesh a little bit over the years. As a musician, I got to sit in with Dark Star Orchestra and play the song Dark Star, which is, for those of you that aren't familiar, like the Grateful Dead's uh, Stairway to Heaven or something, with Donna Jean Godchow in the front row, which was, in case you don't know who that is, she was a backup singer for the Grateful Dead. And I actually got to hear directly from her how she got into the band, which is one of the most incredible stories you'll ever hear in your life. And even the circumstances that surrounded myself ending up on that stage with Dark Star Orchestra in Woodstock, New York, of all places, with Donna in the audience, is extraordinary in and of itself. And I'll real quickly relay some of it just because it's such a nutty thing that happened. So, and it does relate to the Grateful Dead because they had this reputation for getting the weather to respond. And it's something that if I haven't seen it so many times myself, I rolled my eyes just like everyone else at first. It helped later on that I saw a Hawaiian shaman called the Wind, and I've seen this sort of phenomenon in other contexts. And of course, now we even have some research that shows that a large group of people may have the ability to influence things on a subatomic level. I don't know how that translates to weather, but I think we're getting closer to understanding how there could be even a mechanism behind these kind of occurrences. And so Dark Star Orchestra is the world's greatest Grateful Dead cover band, right? And people would maybe argue that there are others now, but at the time, for sure. And I'd seen them 5 or 6 times. I had never seen them play their namesake song, Dark Star. So, I had been in the audience at All Good Festival, my introduction to this band, and when we arrived, my brother and I were walking to our tent, and this old hippie, it was the first time I'd heard this legend. He just stops us and he says, the Grateful Dead used to make it rain when they played Looks Like Rain. And of course, my brother and I were like, whatever, old timer, go eat some more acid, which was what everyone thought back in the day. Deadheads were people that had done too much LSD and that the Dead sucked and that, only burnouts thought it was amazing because they're idiots and they're on drugs. That was the general consensus in the mainstream about the Grateful Dead, right? So we go out to our tents and we get ready for the show or whatever, and we come down and I think about what this old man said to me, and I look at the sky and there's not a cloud. I can see stars. It doesn't look like it's going to rain. And so Dark Star Orchestra begins their set. They get to the end of the first the end of the first set, and I didn't know Looks Like Rain. I was not familiar with Grateful Dead music, right? So the first time he sings the words, it feels like rain. We feel raindrops hit our faces. And my brother and I just look at each other instantly. Like, I know that the old man saying this shit is running through his head, right? And so as the song builds in intensity, it rains harder and harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. And then finally, lightning bolt on the last beat blasts horizontally across the top of the crowd. And I would find out later directly from the members of Dark Star Orchestra that lightning bolt actually hit the stage. And it blew out a transformer, and that's why the show stopped. But at the time, this was 10 years earlier, I had no idea what happened. I just thought it was raining so hard, the band's got to go, right? They just can't finish in the rain. But this lightning bolt that had shot right, my hair stood up for sure. And I thought I'm imagining this for a second, and then some old hippie lady leaned over and said in my ear, that was really close. And I was like, holy fucking crap, that actually just happened. And so 20,000 people in total silence just turned around and walked back to our tents. Like, who could say anything? and you got to understand that this was Dark Star Orchestra. This was 5, 6, 7 years after Garcia's death. But we had all heard older Deadheads telling us these stories, particularly about that song. And if you bear in mind the fact the Grateful Dead played 3,000 songs over the course of their entire career, right? 3,000 songs. And they never repeated a set list except for once, 1981 and 91, almost 10 years to the day apart. Um, Only repeated a set list once, played that many songs. There's not really that great of odds that they're going to play anything in particular at any given show. This is part of the magic of it, and where we sort of derive one of the greatest lessons that the Grateful Dead sort of taught people. And so 10 years later, I've seen Dark Star Orchestra like 6 or 7 times, never seen them play Dark Star. So I'm standing there with Rob Eaton on the deck of this barn thing where this gig was. Donna Jean Godchow is there. Rob Baracco, who played in the Dead after Garcia died as a keyboardist, was on stage with us. Um, and, it was enough that I was going to be on stage with Dark Star Orchestra, but, having Donna in the front row, and so I asked Rob Eaton, so what do you guys, what do you want to play? Like maybe Scarlet Fire? And he's like, nah, that's a little bit played out. Why don't we do Dark Star? And if you had told me when I was like 21 years old, standing in that festival field, watching that lightning bolt hit the stage and the weather respond apparently to this music after that old man had told us it would, um, my head would have exploded, and particularly that song of all songs, and I would, every time I saw Dark Star Orchestra, I would think to myself, when am I ever going to hear them play Dark Star? Well, it turns out that I would hear them play it for the first time standing on stage with them, with Donna and David Gans, who wrote Playing in the Band, sitting in the audience, and someone that was actually in the Dead on the stage, which was just, but this is this is in the nature of Grateful Dead stories. This is the kind of thing that happens. And, you, there's really more to that story that's even weirder, but I'm just trying to establish kind of the general gist of, the kind of weird magic of consciousness that occurs with this. But the reason it's such a powerful phenomenon, I should have probably dived into that right away. It's difficult to organize this subject because there's so much of it. But the fundamental thing, I think, and I'm going to have to use another experience anecdote, I guess, for my own life. Um, the thing that was really powerful about the Grateful Dead, and this is in their words, they really didn't like to talk directly about this thing because they already had a reputation. Um, they already had a reputation for being on way too many drugs, and their fans kind of thinking Garcia was a god and all this kind of stuff. And so uh, they didn't, they were kind of careful about what they spoke about. In fact, they had a list of things that if you brought them up during interviews, the interview's over. And this was one of them. So if they brought it up, it was okay to talk about. Um, so, and the weather phenomena, by the way, go look at that thumbnail. I will tell you the story behind that thumbnail in a minute. But that was just, that was too much. I mean, it was, people accused them, actually, Billboard magazine accused them of faking it because it was just too much. And again, I'll explain in a minute. Um, but the real essence of the thing is that the Grateful Dead demonstrated that consciousness is a unified field, and they figured out that psychedelics brought the fields down that create our singular vantage point, right? And it's rare, but you can find these interviews where they would claim that they could actually switch bodies if they took enough LSD and look out of each other's eyes, play each other's instruments. They could zip out into the audience, and uh, the kinds of experiences along those lines that were reported by audience members, it's almost a rule rather than an exception. And so on top of all that, the message of the Grateful Dead, what people really actually received uh, in terms of meaning from the music, had nothing to do with the lyrics. There are only a couple of Grateful Dead songs where they actually articulate the thing that the audience understood, right? So you have Ripple, which has the great line, "Ripple in still water when there is no pebble tossed nor wind to blow," which is basically what the universe is. Um, some of the most amazing lyrics ever, by the way, while we're on the subject. But they communicated something to the audience without even speaking it. And that was really what hit me at the first show, when I really realized there's something about this band that is not normal. And so I'll tell you the story of my first exposure, and it was after Garcia died. What happened, how it all happened, and the impact that it had on me was tremendous, because I was I had psychedelic inclinations, but I came from a really rough neighborhood. I lived in Washington D.C. I was a cocaine dealer as a teenager. I was armed all the time. I mean, I wasn't all gangster, but I definitely was, you know, not a gentle hippie. Let's put it that way. And so Garcia had been dead for a long time, and one day at work, I just thought, I'm gonna, I have to go get a live Grateful Dead CD. And I didn't know why, but I went to the record. I told my boss I have to go, and I was waiting tables, so it was a little weird that I just darted out. But it wasn't super busy, so just out of nowhere, I'm just compelled to. I was like 20, I think. I was compelled to just go buy this double disc thing. Took it home, listened to it, didn't really like it very much, and I was like, huh, that was a waste of 35 bucks. And so I went and bought another one. I didn't like that one either, really. Didn't really get it. And so I guess a few weeks later, I happened to take LSD at home, and somebody else put one of those CDs in. And I wasn't thinking about it. I just walked by the stereo, and I could hear this three-dimensional programmatic music. And programmatic music is when there are images that are written into the music. Usually it's done deliberately. So, a modern programmatic composer might have, there's a really famous piece that's supposed to be four people in a convertible, and they stop at a stop sign, and the guy flies off. And so the music is supposed to um, create these images in your mind. And so that was happening in a far more sophisticated way, even than that car. And it hit me, and I was like, oh my God, really? This is what the Grateful Dead was? And the best analogy I can make for it is, if you guys remember those like blurry crystal images that you would stare at until your eyes went out of focus, and then there's that 3D image there. That's what it's like to take LSD and listen to the Grateful Dead. It's very, very rare that anyone understands it without listening to it at least once on psychedelics. And I'm sorry, I know this sounds like the kind of pretentious, hubristic shit that superiority complex having psychedelic people will say, but it's true. Our normal minds do not possess the subtlety, in most cases, to perceive things on the level that the Grateful Dead was operating. That's honestly it. So that's why psychedelics are necessary. I mean, you're using more of your brain, right? You're using parts of your brain that you never will otherwise. Like there's electrical activity in parts of the brain that are normally totally dormant no matter what, right? So I decided I need to go see the surviving members of the Grateful Dead, and I told my brother's goth friend, who I never thought would actually be there. This is important to the story, because again, it makes no sense that this happens. But this is the way this consciousness, this energy, compels events around it, right? And the more you research and study the Grateful Dead, you see so many of these stories that you'll just eventually you just kind of think this can't be real. There's no way that this was what actually happened, but indeed it was. And so I go to the show, and I still didn't really fully get it. I knew that the music was amazing on psychedelics, but it's not like I really understood yet. And at one point during Scarlet Begonias, which I had never heard before in my life, I did eat some mushrooms, and it's like something clicked in the band. And this is something all Deadheads know about. Like, and Tool does it. A lot of bands really do it, where all of a sudden there's like this spark, almost like nuclear flames enter the music, but it's very positive. But it's like it just catches on fire in this supernatural way that a lot of people don't. believe in or understand that it's even something that music can do, right? And so it happened at this particular show, and when it did, it's like I was blinded by like white light, and I'm sitting on the ground thinking of all of the places to find something this incredibly, extraordinarily impossible and amazing. The washed up members of the Grateful Dead, like this is what they're doing. And as soon as I had that thought, they sing from the stage. Sometimes you can get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. And I'm like, what the fuck? You know, this is the kind of thing that will turn an acid, make somebody an acid casualty. This is what Garcia meant when he said that, you know, Grateful Dead music can be too powerful for some people. This experience of the symmetry in the universal mind can really just freak you out. And I think that that response of sort of paranoia is because we are conditioned to believe that this sort of stuff is insane. And really, as Carl Jung said, these synchronicities and these experiences like that are part of the fabric of the universe. And you know, when you're using your entire brain, for example, on mushrooms, you will have these experiences more often because you're sort of there's no interference to the reception of the symmetry that underlies all phenomena in the universe. It's what gives its order. There's always symmetry there. Um, which, by the way, is, you know, part of what I'm trying to get across is that it does not require um, woo really to understand the mechanisms behind all of this stuff. The filters in your brain, in your nervous system, the reducing valve, as Aldous Huxley actually, McKenna was repeating that, by the way. Huxley is actually the first one that talked about the reducing valve that psychedelics turn off. Um, so that happened, right? Sometimes you get shown the light in the strangest places if you look at it right. Literally 2 seconds after I think, really, this is what the washed up members of the Grateful Dead are doing. It was just my head almost exploded. So before I could even recover from that, in the next song, by the time I had stood up and I something else happened in the music that was just too weird to be real, which is really the magic of this stuff. It's what happens during the improvisations. It's like the group mind takes over, and the music develops a level of sophistication and power that is preternatural, if not supernatural. And it's you just can't believe it's happening, but it's happening anyways. And it's not the acid because you know once you have learned to see it, right? Once you've been exposed to it, once you know what you're looking for, the next time you go and listen to the Dead, you'll still understand it, maybe not as deeply, but you can perceive it after a couple of times of tripping and listening to it. Um, in my experience, anyways. Uh, Yeah, I mean, I would only listen to the Dead really on acid. I mean, you don't have, you know, I listened to a show from '77 the other day on mushrooms, and it was just the most insane goddamn thing ever, you know? And that's another, well, let me try to stay a little bit focused. I really jumped into this way faster than I mean to, but it's just such a huge subject. In fact, I may do a series of these. I should also let you guys know while I'm thinking about it that I just figured out how to use OBS. So from now on, like when I do music live streams, the backing tracks will actually be direct. So the crappy sound quality will be gone finally. Going to Loha in a few days to get a microphone. Um, so everything about this channel is about to get better because now I can, you know, I can bring up stuff from anywhere online, and I will have my face in a little bubble instead of the, you know, real big taking up the whole screen kind of deal. So anyways, so the next thing that happens at the same show, right? Um, Something else happened crazy in the music that was, I was already having trouble dealing with what was happening. And I looked around the audience and I could see the same expression on everyone's face. Like, you know, and I thought, oh my God, everyone, all of us are perceiving this and we're all one mind right now. Like everyone is telepathically linked. And as soon as I have that thought from the stage, I hear, can't look at you without looking at me. We're guilty of the same old things, talking more and more about less and less and forgetting the love we bring. And I'm like, what the fuck? It's like, no wonder people think this band was a CIA experiment. You know what I mean? And the songs were designed to do this to an extent, I think. Maybe not even consciously, but there was certainly an element of intentionality to provoking these kind of experiences. Um, so I'm like, man, this is too much. I got to get out of here. And it was this big bowl, Nissan Pavilion. So I walk way up to the edge of the bowl and I see this other guy. There's only two of us, right? There's tons of people, like 20,000 people. But there's only this one other guy I see walking up the other side of the circle. I'm coming this way. I get to the middle of the thing and it's my brother's friend that I'd mentioned the show to. And he's like, dude, what the fuck is going? I can't handle it, man. I'm like, are you tripping? He's like, no. With the energy down there, like, what the fuck is this? Like, what did you bring me to, dude? This is not normal. And I was like, oh my god, thank God it's not just me. You know what I mean? Like, this guy's not even tripping, and he had to get it. He was a normal state of mind. He had to get the fuck away from it too. Just to kind of collect yourself and to just go like, man, that's something that's really happening down there. Uh, and so this was also my first introduction to the beam, which is another one of the most extraordinary things that's ever happened in human history. I think this instrument is, I think it's 13 feet, which is important, long, and it has piano wire tuned only in fifths and octaves, right? So it's like a power chord, and it's actually a Pythagorean monochord. So it's based on this tuning that Pythagoras created. And of course, if you know anything about the connection to the mysteries and Freemasonry and all that kind of stuff, that is an element of the Grateful Dead. I'm not trying to give any credence to the conspiracy theories that it was a CIA um, operation or whatever, but there is a lot of Western mystery occult stuff in the lyrics that almost no Deadhead realizes is there. If you don't know some really deep ancient mythologies that almost no one has heard, you're not going to get these references. And if you try to tell anybody as a Deadhead, they're probably just going to think you ate too much acid and are making shit up. And eventually we'll talk about that stuff too, because it's pretty incredible once you understand where this stuff is coming from and the lyrics are giving context. You're going, oh my god, you got to be fucking kidding me. So the beam is this Pythagorean monochord, 13 feet long, and it's played either by being strum or by dragging this big metal pipe across the strings. And so if you just strum it, it is like it has the widest frequency range of any instrument ever built, and so it has giant guitar pickups basically, and it is the most powerful, insane thing. Literally, it is on Earth. And the Grateful Dead have 3 times now been in possession of the world's most powerful high fidelity sound system. First, in the early 70s, they had the Wall of Sound, which, when I have OBS working, you guys, I'll just pull these things up in the background while we're talking about them. But for now, you're going to have to Google it later. So the Wall of Sound was, I think it had 40,000 just vocal horns or something. Like the bass cabinets were 2 stories tall. Phil Lesh could send any one of his, I think he played a 6-string bass, at least 6, I think. And he could send a signal to any one of the different um, uh, he had a different set of speakers for each of the strings, and he could bounce it around. Um, it was so powerful that they browned out the town they were playing in 3 times when they plugged it in. Um, which is really funny because a lot of people then were familiar with American Beauty and this sort of like mellow hippie music, and they would actually go to see the Dead, and Phil's dropping bombs like Hiroshima. The Wall of Sound could project sound evenly for a half mile with no distortion or breakup or loss of volume. I mean, what the hell, And especially in 1974, people were not prepared for this. And then when you understand what was coming through those speakers, it's just a whole another level of like what, what, um, and also this is when people started showing up, 100,000 people to see one band that had no radio hits. Another extraordinary element of the Grateful Dead, they had no radio hits. But anyways, the Beam, you guys, a really great recording. Just before we move on. Is from Wake Up to Find Out, Madison Square Garden, I think 1990, the drums and space segment. There's the best recording of the Beam that I've ever heard. But what I was saying is, the sound system. So the 74 sound system, 2 stories tall, 500,000 watts or something. I mean, you got to look up pictures of this thing. It makes no sense. The people look like that big, and then there's these huge, huge stacks of speakers behind them. So then in the 1990s, Garcia and the band spent $11 million just in research and development to create this new sound system to replace the one that they had. And so they actually used NASA surplus parts. The wiring and the speaker cones were actually the outer panels of the space shuttle that were discarded. So it wasn't built by NASA, but it was space shuttle parts, basically. And 17 tractor trailers full of gear. That was the wall of sound, actually. 17 tractor trailers to move it around. So they were super fucking serious about their sound, right? And then in 2015, which is the show that I used the picture from the thumbnail of the double rainbows, they had Myers Sound Labs develop the most, again, advanced sound system in the world. And they, again, had a piece of equipment from NASA that is normally used to map the stars by detecting these infinitesimal vibrations. And so they can use this thing to tune every single seat in a football stadium so it sounds exactly the same. The first night I was down in the pit right next to the stage, and the second night I actually went to the top of the football stadium just to see if it was true when the bass hit, and it was absolutely true. Um, Really just messed up. And the sound of it, I mean, I've never heard music sound. It was like being submerged in like liquid crystals somehow. There are just no words to describe the sound quality. And so, man, I have missed a couple of my sort of essential stories, but I guess we'll just keep plugging along. Okay, so the beam, what the hell? Okay, so while we're talking about the reunion shows, the Grateful Dead, one of their biggest mythoses, I guess, was this thing of being able to control the weather. And, as I was saying, when I was younger, people rolled their eyes at the Grateful Dead, period, much less the idea that anything or anyone could have any influence on weather patterns, right? And understandably so. But I have seen some crazy stuff go down in regards to this. There's footage of video of some of this on YouTube. Again, the Dead aren't the only ones that this has happened. One really famous instance is Fish at Red Rocks. They play a song called Divided Sky in the middle of a storm, and the sky splits, and it's storming on both sides of Red Rocks and not raining on the audience. There's video of this. I mean, of course, it could be a coincidence, I guess, but man, I've seen it happen at Tool concerts. It's happened at my own shows. And of course, coincidence is a possibility, but this is the best one. And it was so improbable that Billboard magazine actually accused them of staging it. So in 2015, the surviving members of the Grateful Dead, it was the 50th anniversary. So they got together in Santa Clara first, and with Trey Anastasio from Fish on lead guitar, which I felt was an absolutely terrible, financially motivated decision. Um, and not that he's not amazing, he is, but just not the guy for this job. Jimmy Herring would have been the guy who they were going to give it to, but he doesn't sing, and they wanted the guy to be able to sing Garcia's parts, even though Bruce Hornsby was going to be there, who would have done the best job. Anyways, so um, so it's always been a symbol of the Grateful, or of Jerry Garcia's spirit since he died, to the Deadheads, the rainbow, right? And on the first night of the run of the reunion shows, uh, as Bob Weir's singing the line from the other one, the rainbows, what is the line? The rainbows tremble round and round and then explode. So a line about rainbows twirling around each other, which implies two rainbows at least, right? So it was also Gay Pride Day, and that's why there were two rainbows. But so Bob Weir gets to that line in the other ones. He's literally singing about rainbows, and this double rainbow forms behind the stage. And, again, We have a totally different generation because this is 20 years after the first time I ever witnessed this. Okay, so now we have another generations of 20-year-olds that have heard all these stories about them controlling the weather, or compelling it to, I don't know if control is the right word. I think symmetry in the wiring under the board may actually be a better way of talking about it. Um, but so, another generation of mostly 20-year-old people in their 20s, um, and here it is again. And it was really great for me because I had just read the drummer's um, autobiography. And he said, it appeared that we were controlling the weather, but, I don't think that was the case. It just seemed that way sometimes. But when those rainbows appeared behind the stage, they didn't know, right? So they went backstage for the set break, and then they came back out, and Billy, who was the one that wrote that they didn't impact the weather, takes the microphone and he's crying, and he's like, you guys saw those fucking rainbows, and you guys know what that was. And it was just such a poetic thing that it was Billy of all the people that acknowledged the rainbows, because he had just written in his book that it wasn't real, this weather phenomena. Um, and so the next day, the headline in Billboard magazine, I was on the cover of the Wall Street Journal somehow the next day as well. They just took a picture of me walking around the parking lot, and somebody else saw it like online, and was like, "Hey, dude, isn't this you?" Um, so so Billboard magazine says, that they had contacted the lighting company that did the show, and that they said, "Oh yeah, we put 250,000 LEDs in the sky," and so Billboard was like, "Yeah, they faked it. It was just, it was LEDs." And so the lighting company called Billboard magazine back immediately and was like, "Are you stupid? There is no way to bend light like that. That's not a possible illusion. Like, we couldn't have done that if we wanted to." And so, I mean, maybe if they had, like, they had some kind of rain generating thing. Oh, here's the other crazy thing about it. It doesn't rain in San Francisco in late June. It just doesn't. Like, it just doesn't. And if you look at the pictures, you guys can see this for yourselves. There is a dark cloud of rain above the stadium, and it is clear as a bell all around everywhere else. It was truly an extraordinary thing to witness. And maybe an even better thing was turning around and seeing the faces of all of these, 50,000 people, 80,000 people, that were just their eyes bugging out of their head, people instantly bursting into tears because of the association with Garcia's spirit and all that. Um, it it was just too much, man. It was too much. So Billboard magazine retracted their story, or redacted. Is that retracted, redacted, whatever? Their story the next day, and the headline was, "Maybe the Grateful Dead actually does jam with God," which was always kind of the suggestion of the people, the Deadheads, that there was something like holy going on here. And one of the things I haven't really talked about so much about this, and this is really probably the most important element of it, is that the changes that overcame people. How do you explain? Like, there's all this tension that builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and then when it finally breaks, oftentimes there would be this like energy that emerged from it, and exposure to that energy was like getting washed in some sort of like gnosis nuke. And you would never be the same again. And it's a really difficult thing to understand. But after that first show, I no longer carried a gun. Uh, you know what I mean? Like, and it was crazy when I was leaving, even the cops, like, this is Virginia or Maryland, maybe, where it's like Gestapo. The cop on the way out, man, my pupils were the size of flying saucers, pot smoke rolling out of the car. Cop sticks his head right in the window and tells me to have a grateful day, and grabs my shoulder, smiling ear to ear. And I'm like, what the fuck is up with this band? Like, what do they do to people? How is this possible? And, I forgot to mention, like, when you arrive, if you had never witnessed it before, it was the way people treated each other was so uncomfortable because everyone was so kind and everyone treated you like you were an old friend. And there was this kind of weird thing of like being an insider to like this evolutionary leap or something, some kind of like real natural magic that only this group of like a million people knew about. It was a pretty fucking big group of people, but you know, in the parking lot there would be people juggling fire, and you would have conversations. You know, I was expecting a bunch of burnout pothead idiot hippies. No, the people were some of the most talented, intelligent, and of course now we know that, but you know, artists everywhere. It was just the parking lot was the most amazing thing ever before you even got into the fucking show. Um, and so, speaking of natural magic and credibility, there was a Harvard professor and author. You probably heard of him, named Joseph Campbell. He was a mythologist, I think, primarily, and he studied, you know, magic. He had an interest in psychedelics to an extent, but he was a Harvard, you know, serious intellect, probably one of the great minds of the 20th century. And he said something that should really, really raise your eyebrows if you're having trouble processing this talk of magic and consciousness and whatever, the woo element of the Grateful Dead, right? In fact, you can actually watch an interview with Joseph Campbell and Jerry Garcia together, which is an extraordinary thing. Like, just to imagine the kind of conversations that would have gone on between these two. Um, and of course, you know, the Grateful Dead were hip to the mysteries, and Joseph Campbell's primary focus was the mystery traditions, or one of his primary focuses. But what he said about the Grateful Dead is that in all of his years of traveling the world and looking for real phenomena of natural magic, like actual indisputable phenomena that, you know, like water bubbling without a fire or wind blowing on, you know, that kind of thing, he said he had seen it twice in the jungles of Borneo and at Grateful Dead concerts. And so, you know, this is like at the height of ridicule of the Grateful Dead, right? But we have a Harvard, one of the most eminent minds on the entire planet, saying that he had seen magic twice in all of his travels in the jungles of Borneo and at Grateful Dead concerts. And he said Grateful Dead concerts like it was a routine thing. And it really was. You know, again, my personal opinion is that we have those filters in our consciousness that normally inhibit telepathy, and they also narrow the bandwidth of our perception so that we're not seeing everything that's really available to us or even experiencing it because there are these more subtle wavelengths. And so I think that it's not even necessary when you're in this gigantic crowd, because one of the things that's going to happen with an audience of that size is that people's brain waves are going to entrain. And the entraining is going to happen with the band as well as the people in the audience. And so once you entered this environment where you had 80,000 people, many of whom's filters were completely down, everyone's consciousness is going to sort of achieve homeostasis through entrainment, right? And this is science. This is not woo. And so when this huge crowd is further excited by this crazy fucking music, and they're super high, most of them, and the idea of rain is introduced, and then it rains. Like, not really that surprising. That you know, in short, that's basically my explanation for how this stuff would actually happen. Um, and you know, just as an interesting anecdote, I actually got to talk to Phil Lesh, the bass player from the Grateful Dead, about the telepathy on stage. I got to look him dead in the eyes and ask him if it was a marketing gimmick for one thing. But another, I guess, worthy story, and another reason why I don't buy the Illuminati CIA connection. Phil Lesh is one of the most warm and sincere people I have ever encountered in my entire life. Totally approachable, even though he's, rock star legend, and he was the arrogant one in his younger years. But, just I was really surprised actually, because the first time I approached him, I was just some random guy, and I totally expected him to blow me off and, like, hello, get away from me. And I wouldn't have blamed him. That's what made sense to me. But here's the thing, you guys, and we'll talk about this too, because why did the Grateful Dead have this power? Why did they have this magic? Part of it was authenticity. Another reason to not believe the CIA bullshit. You cannot fake this stuff. You can't phone it in. One of the reasons that they had so much power is because they were totally sincere and authentic. And they had like a code that they lived by. There were certain rules that were absolutely inviolable. One of them was that you cannot tell another man what to do no matter what. And they only violated that rule like once when they were pretty sure Garcia was going to die if they didn't intervene. But for the most part, no matter what, they would not tell another person what to do. And so there were these, and that you have to live according to this code and embody it in your art. Otherwise, it doesn't have the structural integrity to be what it was, right? You had to live it in order to reflect it with that kind of power. Um, let that be a message to all you musicians out there. A lot of people wonder like why they're not able to generate that kind of energy and stuff. You have to have purpose, and it has to have meaning. Otherwise, your shit is garbage. Your shit is trash, to put it bluntly. So, anyways, Phil Lesh. I was at his restaurant, which just unfortunately closed down because of COVID, and I was going to play a song with his sons, who were playing their first show at Terrapin in the kitchen, not the kitchen, what do you call it? The dining room, right in the dining room. And I don't know how it didn't occur to me that this is Phil Lesh's children, his two sons playing their first public performance. Of course, he's going to be here. And so it was a friend of mine that was a San Rafael. That's where both Metallica and the Grateful Dead live. A millionaire eccentric friend of mine that knew the whole family had asked the kids. I didn't put him up to it or anything. And in fact, it made me extremely uncomfortable. But so they said yes. And so I go to sit at a table at the front row, and I look over at the door, and there's Phil and Jill walking in, and they sit down right beside me, like Phil's elbow is touching mine. And I'm like, what the fuck? So, of course, that would happen, but I didn't think about it. And so that was a pretty tremendous experience because Phil and Jill are crying, and I'm like elbow to elbow with this Phil Lesh. He was on stage with Garcia at every great, I mean, it was just like, really. And it's not like having a hero with the Grateful Dead because of this weird mystical power. It was sort of like a fictional mythological character just came in and plopped down beside me or something. Uh, so after the show was over, uh, I walked up to Phil and I was like, Phil, can I talk to you for a second? And he said, sure. And I hadn't really thought about what I was going to say. And so I just told him basically that I was a lost kid kind of, and I came from a broken home, terrible poverty, violence, and all this stuff. And that if it wasn't for the influence of the Grateful Dead, that I probably would have ended up in prison or dead. And his eyes welled up with tears, and he put his hand on my arm, and I was like, holy shit, I was really expecting something more along the lines of, that's nice. Good to meet you. I'm busy. You know what I mean? And so tearing up, and then he just kept talking to me and talking and talking. And so at one point I said, Phil, the telepathy thing, it's sort of marketing gimmick. Did you guys somehow figure out how to fake this? Like, and he's like, no, it's absolutely real, but you have to be listening in a way that is beyond ears. You have to be completely and totally open and hypersensitized. LSD helps, and so I knew that already, but I just wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth while I was looking him dead in the fucking eyes, and so. He asked me to bring in music, and I honestly, it's embarrassing to admit this, but I had such a terrible self-sabotaging streak at that age. I didn't do it. I just never came back. Or no, I did a few times, and I talked to Phil again a couple times, but I never gave it to him. And in fact, another testament to Phil's sincerity of character is that the next time he saw me, like 2 months later, not only did he recognize me, he actually walked up to me, gave me the most heartbreaking, disappointed look that I could. It was terrible, and I knew what he was going to say. But he's like, because remember I was saying he was the arrogant one, right? He's like, I'm not trying to be arrogant, um, but you're a Deadhead, and I'm Phil Lesh, and I asked you for music, and you brought me nothing, nothing, and I was just destroyed. But I still never did it. And this is, I mean, I talk about this a lot on my channel. This is the kind of stuff that we need psychedelic medicine to heal, because if you have a self-sabotaging complex or something, that was my dream happening in a way that was beyond my wildest expectations, and I just totally wanted nothing to do with it. True story. I wish it had a better ending, and it still could, because I actually continued to, be friendly with Phil over the years, and I don't think it's out of the question if I ever return to the States and get something together that I drop it off with the girl up front, or well, chirping clothes. But you know what I mean. I don't know that it's that it was bad though. It was really bad. But at any rate, the real point is that Phil was unbelievably warm and sincere, and again, it's the music has within it the essence of the people that are creating it, and so this wordless effect that the Grateful Dead would have by sending vibrations out into the audience that communicated a very specific message that changed people in a uniform way, right, with great consistency. We all understood exactly what it meant, even though they weren't articulating anything. And, it was this understanding that we really truly are uh, uh, experiencing an illusory singular vantage point, right? And that we really are, can't look at you without looking at me. We're guilty of the same old thing, talking more and more about less and less and forgetting the love we bring. That's it in a nutshell. Um, yeah, that's true. You definitely have to really listen to the Deb. Like if you're just casually listening to it, it's probably annoying even. Yeah, it's not something to just put on in the background and go on about your business. Uh, um, where were we at with all of this? Okay, so the unspoken message that is being understood and received by the people in the audience. Okay, so now let's fast forward a couple of years and take the Grateful Dead out of the equation and talk about something from my own life that happened, right? So once I really understood what the Dead was doing, and I understood that if we don't expand, I forgot to mention something about Joseph Campbell, right? The guy, the Harvard mythologist that said that he saw magic in two places in his entire life: Jungles of Borneo and Grateful Dead concerts, right? He also said that the Grateful Dead was the antidote to the atom bomb. And so when I'm talking about this message that was unspoken but yet received unanimously by everyone in the audience somehow, that's what he was talking about. And so, I really appreciate Joseph Campbell's input, because he's not some burnout hippie. He was a Harvard mythologist and probably one of the great geniuses of the last century. And so also do me a favor, you guys, if you appreciate this content, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon. I'm going to put some other options to support us with cryptocurrency, Cash App, Zelle, or PayPal, because we are demonetized. I get no money at all from YouTube for doing this. So if you appreciate it and you want us to be able to put more energy into it, please support us. Last time I asked for support, somebody called me a beggar. I didn't think that was very fair. Put a lot of thought and time and energy into this stuff. Okay, so antidote for the atom bomb, because it creates this awareness of this unified field of consciousness of which we are all part. And the reason I said that it is the most important cultural phenomena of the 20th century is essentially that, but also because the influence of it is way more far-reaching than just people that went to Grateful Dead concerts. I started to realize this once I understood that there are symbols and there are abbreviations that you see every single day of your life. Now that I've pointed this out to you, if you live in the United States in particular, but almost anywhere in the world, well, no, a lot of places in the world, but particularly in the United States, you will see a Grateful Dead symbol every time you leave your house on any day ever, ever. Watch out. You'll see them. Dancing skeletons, dancing bears, Annie behind me. Um, going down the road feeling bad. I used to see that all the time in high school. GDTFB. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? And then I found out, oh, it's a Grateful Dead bumper sticker. And there's a bunch more, you know, the handprint with the missing middle finger, because Garcia was missing the middle finger on his hand. You know, if you know what all these symbols are, you realize, holy shit, man, these people are everywhere. And also the extent of their reach wasn't really readily perceived because it was embarrassing to admit. I've actually spoken to Danny Carey from Tool about this because the Dead are a big influence on at least Danny. I don't know about the rest of them, but he fully gets the Grateful Dead. I mean, we had the same conversation basically that I'm having with you guys right now in LA one night, and I made a video about that story as well. Um, uh, so where was I at with this whole shenanigan? Oh, they're the ripple and still water thing. It's because people were embarrassed to even admit that they were Deadheads. Like, who's the guy from Black Flag? Henry Rollins, Patti Smith, punk rock icons that cover Grateful Dead songs, and the people in the audience don't even know it. Probably, you know, that they have no idea that he's playing Franklin's Tower and that Patti Smith is playing Black Peter or whatever. It's a Dead song, unless they told them. Elvis Costello playing Ship of Fools. You know, Bill Clinton went to 13 Grateful Dead concerts, and I got news for you guys. You know how many Grateful Dead concerts you go to if you don't do LSD? One, maybe two, probably just one. Definitely not 13, right? I mean, what the hell? And then Al Gore, maybe Gore was the one that went to 13 and Clinton went to like 7 or something. But, you know, this is a pretty clear indication we've had at least one guy in the White House that has done LSD. And for the record, Garcia always refused to. Dang, I need to turn that tea off or it's going to burn. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that. I have some Bobensana Guayusa tea on the stove, and I didn't want it to all the water boil away and ruin it. So also they refused to play. They were asked to play Clinton's inauguration, and he said Garcia said no, unless you'll agree to legalize marijuana. And Clinton said, I can't do that. And they said, well, then we're not playing the White House. So it wasn't until Garcia died that. Uh, the Dead actually ended up playing Barack Obama's inauguration, but to their credit, after a while, they figured out that Barack Obama was a complete fraud, and they really, really regretted it, and they said never again would they support another politician. Um, so that's another strike against the conspiracy theory people because you know, they refused Bill Clinton, and then they did it for Barack Obama after Garcia was dead. But then when they found out that Barack Obama was fake and was not what they thought he was, they spoke out about him. So um, and I'm really, you know, infinitely thankful for all of the ground zero experiences that I've had with people. The last drummer that I played with in the United States was actually supposed to play Jam in the Sand. Jay Lane was supposed to play Jam in the Sand um, with um, with Dead and Company, and it was canceled. I bet he's really sad right now. But I got to play with Jay, who also was a founding member of Primus. Um, pretty cool because he was in Further and Rat Dog, and I think some other project with those guys. Oh yeah, Wolf Brothers with Bob Weir. Um, So it was just that was a wild thing, to like when I heard that Jay, who was the last drummer I played with in the U.S., was playing with Dead and Company at Jam in the Sand. What the what the hell, Jay? Uh, so yeah, on another occasion, I got to play the prototype for the Beam. Remember the thing I was talking about earlier, Mickey Hart's giant, crazy instrument? I got to play the prototype for that thing at the Hog Farm, which was it's in Laytonville, California, and it's like it was a hippie commune, and they moved, but Wavy Gravy still owns the property. And I actually got to smoke a joint that day with a 98-year-old woman who was the person that turned Garcia onto pot. And I would never have believed her, except that there were other people around that, confirmed that it was actually true, that this lady got Garcia stoned for the first time. So yeah, that was super crazy. But playing the Beam was um, not as cool as it sounds because it was like miniature. It almost was like a giant, what is it, auto harp, I guess. Uh, but I didn't know what it was. It was sitting behind my amplifier, and some guy came to put it in the truck, and I was like, "What the hell is that thing, anyways?" And he said, "Oh, this is Mickey's." It's like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, it's the prototype for the Beam." But in other news, Mickey stole the idea from some guy in San Francisco. Mickey Hart, by the way, is another phenomena all in his own. The guy he was awarded a PhD by the Smithsonian Institution for his knowledge of drumming. He has more drums in his collection than any other person in the world, and that's not really surprising because he has more money than just about anybody else in the world. Um, but he really has done some amazing things and has some amazing instruments. And if you check out Spirit into Sound, um, which has backup vocals by my vocal coach from the States, Raz Kennedy. Um, it has human skeleton. I don't know what to call it. A human skeleton drum. It's just literally bones, and he's just using xylophone hammers to play the skeleton. And you look in the credits, it actually it actually just says, it has like the list of like, tambourine, maracas, human skeleton. Another really crazy story from Grateful Dead lore involving Mickey is the story of the Damu, which is a Tibetan skull. It's a Tibetan drum, but only like really, really advanced Tibetan monks are supposed to be in possession of this thing. And so it has the top of the skull cut off, and then there's human skin pulled across the skull and then attached. And people that are of a higher type of consciousness recognize the Grateful Dead pretty rapidly as like some crazy, expression of consciousness that was 200 years ahead of the rest of the human race. And so they gave Mickey, this monk that was in San Francisco, gave Mickey this Damu, and he said, "But just take it as, a gift. What do you call it? Like a representative of our respect for what you're doing, but don't ever play it." And so Mickey played it, and later that day he drove his car off a cliff and broke every bone in his body. And so when he was recovering, he is a complete psychopath apparently, and he gave it to Phil Lesh and asked him to play it and check it out. And Phil did it, and he became deathly ill, which turned out to actually be hepatitis. Um, but they put it together with the Damu, and they said we shouldn't have played this probably. And so they went back to see the monk hobbling. Phil, Mickey's on crutches and Phil's all green. And the story is that the monk took one look at him and said, "You played the Damu, didn't you?" And just so many crazy things. Like he recorded a quasar and used that as like a beat. His son's Heart in Utero is also on that album as like the kick drum at one point. Uh, well, he told him not to play it, man. Um, Okay, so also let's talk about the connection to the Grateful Dead and the distribution of LSD around the entire world, because this goes back to the uh, this cultural impact that they had. Owsley, who a lot of people have heard of, one of the major LSD manufacturers in the United States ever. Well, not just in the United States, because eventually he figured out that it was legal in Czechoslovakia, and it was Czechoslovakia back then, and he went there where he could manufacture it legally, and then he moved to Australia eventually because he thought the Earth was going to flip over, the poles shift, and ironically, he flipped his truck over and drowned in a puddle, which is what he was trying to avoid, being upside down and drowning, and that's what happened anyways. But Owsley, he was a what do you call it, like rich kid, like stupid, crazy rich, Augustus Stanley Owsley III. And I actually got to go to his wake, which was in a Masonic temple, and that is another crazy ass story. But the true story, I went to Owsley's wake in a Masonic temple. The Masons were like literally coming out as we were going in, um, with like day glow projectors all in the Masonic temple, and in one of the wealthiest places in the world. So I'm sure whoever walked out of that building at that moment were some pretty powerful people. Um, so Owsley had a girlfriend who was a chemist, and she taught him how to make LSD. And this was back when LSD was actually still legal. So Owsley starts making LSD, and then he meets the Grateful Dead, and he's like, okay, you guys need to just eat these crystals all the time, play 7 hours a day or 7 days a week, 12 to 18 hours a day, and you can only eat milk and red meat. And he rented a house, bought them all of their gear. And you know, Garcia said that there were like LSD dust, just like around in the house, you know, on the handle of the refrigerator, just like everywhere. Bob Weir, I think, was 15 years old when all this was, the rhythm guitarist, 15 years old. Um, what a life that guy's had too. I mean, he was adopted into one of the wealthiest families in the United States, and then he's in the Grateful Dead from the time he's 15 until now, basically. Still, more people have seen his face than any other person, live in person, than any other person that's ever lived. He's spent more hours on stage than he's probably played music for more hours than any musician ever. Thoughts on the Holy Mountain? Yeah, absolutely. Watch the special features. He talks about the tarot in a way that will really surprise you. Alexander Hodorowski. Um, and Dune with Mick Jagger, Salvador Dali, um, set by H.R. Geiger, music by Pink Floyd. Never happened, but almost did, man. It's just such a sad, sad story. So, anyways, Owsley is making all of this LSD. And so people say, okay, well, if the Grateful Dead didn't have any hits until 1987, and you know, that's a crazy thing to think about. If you consider how big and vast their audience is, that they've never really had any radio support. You know, you think they have, but they didn't have top 40 hits. Really, they weren't like that. And so when you see these old pictures of over 100,000 people showing up in 1970 to see one band with no hits, that was just on the strength of the live experience and word of mouth. Before the internet, before, you know what I mean? Like, what in the actual fuck? So, so long story short, basically, Owsley was producing most of the LSD that was consumed in the 1960s. There was like one other major guy, the guy that made Orange Sunshine. He actually lived here in Vilcabamba until he died, which is crazy. The Orange Sunshine guy, his wife, I think, is still here. Um, I could, you know, I was like, what are the chances of that? Like, I moved to this place in Ecuador and just barely missed the Orange Sunshine chemist. Like, what in the hell? Um, so at any rate, though, that is, you know, has a lot to do with how they were able to create the wall of sound, how they were able to survive with no radio hits. It wasn't government funding. They were drug dealers, basically. I mean, Garcia didn't have to touch it, but Owsley was making millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of doses of LSD and basically supplying the 1960s. So they didn't need bankrolling from the government because all the LSD was coming from them. Now, I do have to admit, it's a little bit weird that they didn't take Owsley out because everyone knew about it. But they did bust Owsley twice, and the first time they busted him, I told you these stories are not easy to believe, but the first time they busted him, he sued the police department and got his lab back after the charges were dropped, because at the time there was no Analogs Act, so there was no LSD. It was just analogs and precursors. So he sued the cops, got his lab back, successfully got his lab back after getting busted for making acid. And then the second time he got busted, he only did 10 months or something. The Dead would pull up a flatbed trailer and actually perform for him so he could hear them in his prison cell while he was in there. So, that's another part of the story, that the psychedelics and the culture that was kept alive throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, without the Grateful Dead, it would have died with certainty. And they were also the main distribution mechanism for LSD in the United States. In fact, when Garcia died, for a couple of years, I thought that LSD had just disappeared, that they had eradicated. For one thing, one of the reasons I thought that is that they had actually made a lot of the precursor chemicals illegal. So I thought they had successfully eradicated LSD. And it turned out, no, Garcia had just died. And so now there wasn't this circus to distribute the LSD all around the United States. It wasn't until the jam band scene and all of these little festivals were created, that there was a new distribution system that was set up. And also Fish. Once Fish got really big, then all of a sudden there was acid everywhere again. Um, well, I think, Fernando, for one thing, I've done it on purpose. And, if you're just, one of the ways that I did that, I think, is that, if you're just willing to just do the things that people think are too crazy and impossible, then you find out that you can do all kinds of crazy, impossible shit, but you have to actually try. And I think most people just don't ever put that foot forward because they just don't think that you can just walk up to Phil Lesh and start a conversation that turns into a meaningful relationship. And, I can only speak from my own point of view. Maybe it's not, and it is eerie. It's weird. I remember I was talking about how I ended up playing with Dark Star Orchestra. That actually came about because one day I said to my then wife, "Man, I wish Dark Star Orchestra would have like a school where they would teach you how the Grateful Dead's music really works," which is something we're going to talk about if I don't run out of battery, because it's important. There's a formula that makes it so addictive. There's a reason why you can listen to Garcia play a musical phrase that takes 26 minutes to resolve and actually follow it and pay attention the whole time. When he's really on, it's not even difficult. You don't even notice the half hour go by. Um, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I mean, a single phrase can take minutes from Garcia. And there is kind of a formula to it. There's a reason why Grateful Dead music, aside from all of this, you know, esoteric stuff and the songwriting, the depth of the lyrics, and all of that stuff, there are formulaic mechanisms that actually make the music addictive, almost in the same way that a drug is. But what I'm saying is that the Grateful Dead also were extremely impactful in the fact that, while they were keeping this psychedelic torch alive through all these decades where it had been lost, they were also providing through their audience in Owsley the actual LSD for most of the consumers. Um, And so while I was saying that, I remembered another element of this okay, another way that the Grateful Dead have impacted your life is through sound technology, not only performance technology, but also the equipment in your guitar. Active pickups were developed by Alembic for Phil Lesh's bass. Active pickups are extremely common nowadays. Also, one of the craziest innovations that people don't realize is that stage monitors did not exist until the Grateful Dead wanted to be so fucking loud that they needed some way to hear themselves on stage. And so first they developed these hum canceling microphones where they had two out of phase microphones because they couldn't have the speaker facing the mic, the magnets, or they would get all this feedback. So they had these out of phase mics that would cancel the 60 cycle hum. And that's why during that period, when you listen to the Grateful Dead, the vocals sound so nasally and tinny. It's not actually their voices, it's the microphones weren't perfect. But stage monitors and microphones, eventually someone else took the technology further and created microphones that don't feed back when there are monitors, or I don't know what else happened to get rid of the problem, but Stage monitors were developed for the Grateful Dead, and all sorts of other technical aspects of audio were developed by the Grateful Dead. No one had ever thought that we need bass bombs that can flatten cities until Phil Lesh decided that he needed that kind of power. Um, I mean, they had to like use dismantled space shuttles to build their speaker cones. Um, okay, so what else? What else are we missing here in terms of the impact? I mean, I think I've sort of covered it. I mean, it's basically that so many people, and it's still happening. It's still happening. In fact, before we left the United States, I took my partner to see Dead and Company, and of course, I hate to break it to Dead and Company fans, but it's not even close. And the only reason that I say that is because a lot of them will talk about how much better it is, and they've made these terrible T-shirts that say like "Mayor, better than Jerry ever was." Like, who would wear that? Like, what the fuck is wrong with people? And it's not true. I mean, he's a great player, but he does not have the fucking interdimensional fucking energy coming through him the way Garcia did. Not even remotely. He doesn't even know what that is. He's never taken acid. Um, so yeah, sure, he's a great guitarist, but Dead and Company is no replacement. Um, yeah, it's funny when I was the description. A lot of people saw how I was mentioning that the Grateful Dead has eclipsed the Beatles. Like people don't even know who they are. A lot of younger people, and they all know who the Grateful Dead is. Partly because they're still out there filling football stadiums. But I took my partner to see Dead and Company, and they're still producing that energy to the extent that even I didn't bother to try to tell Enrica like to explain it the way I'm explaining it to you guys here. Um, and so, like 3 songs in, between the music, she looked at me and she just explained the Grateful Dead to me basically the way I would explain it to someone. And it really hit me that, like, thank God Dead and Company has, been able to still do that to the extent that people only need to be exposed to it for 20 minutes and they totally understand the entire message. Um, some credit to Enrico, of course, for just being a person that can process that sort of thing and articulate it. But the point remains, all of this crazy stuff that I've been saying during this live stream came out of her mouth without any input from me after being exposed to it, and that's something you'll see very consistently. Getting the Grateful Dead is a very strange, highly nuanced kind of phenomena. Um, Yeah, well, the Shotgun Jesus, yeah, I mean, that's the one time that I experienced playing in a band when it really seemed to connect to the weather, and it was preceded by a lot of ridiculous synchronicities. I don't want to talk too much about it, but uh, yeah, I mean, Fernando, I've told that story a few times. I mean, uh, but yeah, I mean, I've experienced it and I've seen it happen with a couple of other bands. One very famous instance at Red Rocks, Joan Osborne was touring with the Dead, and there's this song that the Dead almost never played called "Comes a Time." Comes a time when the blind man takes your hand, says, "Don't you see? You got to make it somehow in the dreams you still believe." Um, but at one point he says, and the wind blew or something, and the wind blew, right? And there's big screens. You can see her hair fly back. And of course, that kind of thing can totally, be coincidental. But also at a Tool concert, one of the craziest instances of this, Maynard comes out and he says, mention this to me and watch the weather change. It's an interlude or a prelude, I guess, to a song. And when he says this, watch the weather change, the wind blew so hard, they had those hanging speakers and they had big chains on them. And the stagehands had to run out and grab the chains and hold them because the speakers started whipping around so hard. And he's just like smiling, grinning, beaming out into this giant crowd. And this, I'm not going to get too deep into this, but there's a reason why phonetically musician and magician are almost indistinguishably, phonetically similar. Is that the word? Yeah, I think so. And so, what else? I mean, yeah, that's basically the long and short of it, man. It's not as obvious because it's sort of an invisible influence. It's like the influence of Aleister Crowley. Like it's not exactly a household name. It has become kind of, and vilified or not, once you really realize how many musicians, including the Grateful Dead, I mean, their whole um, ethos was thelemic all day long. Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is a law, love under will, right? That's exactly what their thing. Okay, well, actually, I did forget about one element of this. Um, there's a book called Everything I Know About Business I Learned from the Grateful Dead. And in that book, you'll discover that Apple, Microsoft, and a whole shit ton of other major corporations like consciously modeled a large part of their business plan on the Grateful Dead's business plan. And that may seem absurd, but I think it's important to remember that, oh, social media also came out of the Grateful Dead. The first like social media uh, platform was called The Well, and it was for Grateful Dead tape traders on the very early internet. So it was essentially Facebook, very early precursor to Facebook, like in like you know 1998 or something. Uh, so, anyways, the business thing. Google and Apple and Microsoft and there's a whole big list. But if it sounds ridiculous, if you consider that, when you look at people that interacted with Garcia, Bill Clinton said this, but the most consistent thing you hear, like everyone says this, he was the most intelligent person I've ever met, and or that he had the most playful mind of any person that I've ever met. But when you consider some of the people that were saying this, like Bill Clinton, and people that spent a lot of time around elite minds, like Ivy League pedigree, and Garcia was the most intelligent person they've ever met. Like you hear this over and over again. So then when you hear that that Apple and Microsoft and all of these huge corporations actually modeled their business plan in part on the Grateful Dead's business plan, it shouldn't really be that surprising. But most importantly, the Grateful Dead lived according to the ethos that is dictated to us by the new consciousness, the psychedelic consciousness, that we should be interested in ourselves, in our own experience. It's not wrong to want to be wealthy, even, but you have to take care of the people that get you there. And everyone needs to be, if you take care of the collective as if they're just as important as Garcia in this case, then the whole entire organization eventually it's going to be in the best interest of it, right? The way that we're doing things now is like we are. It's like all of your health focus is just around building the muscle in your arms, and you're totally ignoring the rest of it, or some other kind of imbalance like that. I don't know if that was the best analogy, but this approach of like in the last live stream, I mentioned this that they were paying the groupies, like I mean not the groupies, oh gosh, the what do you call those guys? Because my roadies were always groupies, basically male groupies that would carry their stuff around for free. So I have the terms kind of mixed up. Um, but so yeah, the roadies were paid, 20 times as much as somebody like Aerosmith would pay them. And everyone had an equal vote at board meetings from the janitor to Garcia, except that Garcia could overrule the entirety of the organization in the same way kind of that the president can veto, except that it was unspoken in that case. He had the power to just overturn everyone. But And that's the thing too. He was never designated the leader. He didn't want to be called that. But the reality is that one of the main problems with democracy, which Garcia was once asked if he voted, and he said choosing between the lesser of two evils is still choosing evil. And they've never given me something worth choosing, so I've never voted. He never voted in his entire life. Um, but the point is that In a healthy organic ecosystem, a real leader is just going to fall into that role. No one is going to choose them. They are not going to assert their dominance, right? They are just going to, it's obvious, like, oh, that guy clearly is the smartest and whatever, this is a leader. And so Garcia was only the leader of the Grateful Dead in that sense, where he just kind of like bubbled up into his spot. And that is the way a truly healthy ecosystem is going to be led, by the person that organically falls into the position of leadership by default. And that's what actually happens in a system that isn't constrained to function unnaturally. Um, and so the Grateful Dead do not blow smoke. I was talking about the ethos, like no lying. No one is going to flatter anyone. No one is going to tell you anything that they're not really sincere about. You don't do that. You don't tell anyone else what to do, no matter what. Um, and the lessons in the music, right? This is important, and I haven't talked about this yet. I wish I'd gotten to this earlier because I'm probably running out of steam. And this is one of the most important things. Remember, I was saying the Grateful Dead never performed a song the same way twice. Every single performance of any individual song was always different, and every concert was a different set list, which doesn't even make sense. In fact, Garcia was asked in 1987 by Rolling Stone how it was even possible that they always played a different concert every night. Most bands play an hour and a half set that's the same every night. Every note almost is the same, especially back then in the corporate rock days. Like, you didn't just go and just jump off a cliff with 7 people on stage improvising. But that's what the Dead did. And so that gave the music this life, right? It really conveyed the importance of living in the moment, of being sensitized to your environment, of being spontaneous. Because as Terence McKenna observed, monogamy, monotony, and monotheism, right? The great enemies of mankind, the 3 M's, but in particular, monotony. And so this improvisational mindset is what allowed this intelligence, the universal mind, to enter into the music and to play the band, as the Grateful Dead put it. I don't think I mentioned that they actually did talk about this, and they said they didn't know what it is. They said you cannot make it happen. No amount of trying is going to make it happen. It's something either happens or it doesn't. Garcia did hate responsibility, so I wouldn't be I wouldn't be surprised if there was an element in trying to shirk the responsibility of having to produce miracles all the time. I mean, that is kind of a lot of pressure. It's bad enough if you're a musician that is expected to, play really well all the time. But when you're expected to like control the weather and enlighten people, and you're basically like the Grateful Dead was expected to consistently produce miracles. That's a really kind of a fucked up thing to lay on somebody. Um, so, but that was the deal. And so, speaking of miracles, I think one of the other really important messages that the Grateful Dead's music demonstrates for us is that not only are miracles real, but they are reliable. Because, the Grateful Dead would over and over and over and over again jump off a cliff with no plan. And sometimes they would just crash into the rocks. And when it was really bad, it was embarrassing. That I have seen some horrendous footage. So it's not like the net is always there. Like, magic doesn't always work. But most of the time it did to some extent. And what it proved is that these miracles not only happen, but they're reliable. They're consistent. If you learn to trust that they're going to be there, the universe just imbues the chaos with symmetry, because that's how the universe was created. That's what it's always doing. And because we have been trapped in this kind of like limited bandwidth matrix mind perception range, we miss that. But the reality is that these sort of miracles of symmetrical experience, right? There's something in the universe that consciousness itself is the organizing principle that compels the chaotic energy to order and symmetry. And so the Grateful Dead knew that, and they knew that they could just jump off a cliff, 7 people on stage improvising, and these things would happen. And it's not like the entire time. So you have to have patience when you listen to the Dead too. You have to wait for this stuff to come around. Sometimes they were on fire the whole time, and those shows are just exhausting. I mean, it's great, but it's just relentless, just mind bendiness. It can get to be just too much um, after a few hours. Uh, but when this spontaneity is given space, and when the audience and the band have this connection that I think is established by the vibrations in the music, it somehow facilitates this level of communication that transcends linguistic intentionality, or it is pure linguistic intentionality. Um, uh, the things that happen in the music are more sophisticated and powerful than any single individual in the band could hope to produce. And it's also why Grateful Dead studio albums aren't that good compared to the live performances. Garcia put it like, we play well for warm human bodies, we don't play so good for machines. Um, that's what he meant, really. That it's it's the audience is literally creating the music as much. They were just avatars standing there with the instruments in their hand that had developed. The way Aleister Crowley put it is that if the magician can attract any force that he needs by making himself a fit receptacle for it. So in order to improvise as a musician really well, you have to have the vocabulary, which doesn't mean consciously, but in your muscle memory, to play any arpeggio, scale, chord, inversion, whatever. All of this stuff just is in your muscle memory, so that when you're channeling this music, you're a fit receptacle for the force that you're trying to attract, which is the music. Phil Lesh once said that, Dark Star, for example, is always playing somewhere in the universe, and they were just picking it up and letting it pass through them. Um, I was going to pick up the guitar and just play every single Grateful Dead riff that I could think of when I ran out of stuff to say. I don't know if I have the energy for it anymore. But I probably could play 100 Grateful Dead riffs. I'm betting we'd probably get up to, well, the battery would die before I ran out, I guess. Um, no, I didn't really see Tool's latest stage setup. I really didn't like Fear Inoculum that much, and I just kind of dialed them out. It's not even that I didn't. It's yeah, I mean it is. Two of the songs I liked. All of this talk about this masterpiece, I don't understand what people are talking about. And honestly, part of the reason is that most of the songs are older songs, and it's not just recycled riffs, exactly recycled. Um, like what? See if you guys can even hear this with this mic. I don't know. Uh, but for example, this riff from The Grudge. Um, can you guys hear that at all? Is it coming through? Mike, the guitar. Right, that riff from The Grudge. And then they have the same synth sound that was on Lateralis. Um, it's it was I just felt like repackaging your old music for the second time in a row and selling it to your fans as if it's new work that took you 18 years was not really cool. It actually bothered me because they already did that once. Most of 10,000 Days was also old music that they just and they literally put it in this crazy packaging so that people would buy the packaging even though it's just old music again. Um, So, and the ending of 46 and 2 is in another song. Like, if I want to listen to the old Tool classics, I'll just listen to Lateralis or Survival. I don't really see any reason to But you're talking about seeing them live. I guess they're going to play a lot of the older stuff that, and I was really sad about that because I was really looking forward to new Tool music after. That is another band that I should do a live stream about though, because they are the other Grateful Dead basically, and a lot of people have trouble understanding that. Although, like I said, I had this conversation with the drummer from Tool, and he totally knows what I'm talking about. It's not just me. Uh, and the explanation he gave basically is that there's this universal mind, and some of us are really fucking plugged into it, and because basically the question I asked him was, the Grateful Dead and Tool have this weird energetic thing in common. Do you know what I'm talking about? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, what in the hell is up with that? And why do so few people really have it? Like Fish, at the peak of some of their jams, it comes through them like a motherfucker. And then Tool, Pink Floyd kind of had it for a while, and the Dead. But then, and Leftover Salmon actually was another one that did it a lot. It's just like this crazy ass energy just erupts out of the band. And they all have connections to the same mystery school stuff. So, this weird occult element of it. I didn't mention also the occult, the hidden occult meanings in a lot of the Grateful Dead songs. But if you've studied the sort of Luciferian trip, then you know who the Prince of Air is, right? And you know that the will is like the fundamental thing in Satanism. And so when Bob Weir says something like, in this band, it's just kind of the will of the wind with this like kind of weird expression, he's not kidding. Like that, it was an intentional reference, and a lot of people did pick up on it. Friend of the Devil is a friend of mine. It's not totally a joke. And there's a bunch of it. Ripple actually has. Check this out, you guys. Okay, so Ripple starts out with what is it? Do 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 do. There. If my words did glow with the gold of sunshine, and my tunes were played on the harp unstrung, uh, would you hear my voice come through the music? Would you hold it near as it were your own? Um, this esoteric idea that it's Gnostic basically, and so this isn't really hidden that much. It's basically just this Gnostic mysticism um, that what people refer to as Lucifer is actually just light, and the sun is the light bearer. And in the original Hebrew Lucifer myth, Lucifer was the court musician that played from a harp with no strings in his chest directly telepathically into the mind of God. Does that sound familiar at all? The whole concept of what the Grateful Dead are doing is almost taken straight out of the Lucifer myth, which is another point for the conspiracy theorists, I guess. And there are other elements. They repeat the theme a lot. The crow and the wind and the sun and the blue light that's mentioned an awful lot. Lucifer's light is said to be blue. It's throughout the entire catalog. But the craziest one, I think, is Ripple, the most blatant. And because the light that comes from the sun is what our own consciousness is, if you understand this, when the sunlight comes through and you hear this voice, would you hold it near as it were your own, because it is your own voice. Um, but yeah, the harp with no strings is the harp that Lucifer played his music from into the mind of God, according to the old Hebrew mythology, and I'm certain that that is what Robert Hunter was referencing. Partly because there's a lot of other references to it throughout the music, and I know I did miss that. Um, does this come through this mic clearly? That's also Tool. Because I was just earlier, I was thinking like, I wonder how many Grateful Dead riffs I can actually play off the top of my head. I know my battery's going to die. So how does it sound? Can someone tell me if uh, if the guitar sounds okay? one thing that I can explain while I'm on the subject of this. I talked about how I was going to explain how the Grateful Dead kind of. Okay, good. Yeah, I wasn't sure because I have just this like this mic hanging by my ear. Um, so why is it that people can listen to Garcia solo for fucking 45 minutes? And I actually saw because back in the day they would actually play until the sun came up and then into the afternoon the next day. Like they would start at 6 o'clock and they would play till like 10 in the morning the next day. And the thing is, like, no one ever had enough tape to record the whole thing, so nobody but the people that were there know what the fuck happened in the last like 6 hours of those shows. But I was at a head shop one time in the early 2000s, and they had Grateful Dead bootlegs on the wall, and they had a Dark Star written on the top, and there was a line through the whole stack of 90-minute tapes, just line of Dark Star just drawn through it because it was one performance of Dark Star that just went through the whole pile of tapes. Um, and you know, when they were that deep in those improvisations, that's when the shit that would just melt your brain. And you know, a lot of people, it's true, didn't really recover from it. Um, it's like plugging the fucking human brain into a nuclear reactor or something. It really was just okay. But what I'm saying about the music and the reason that it holds people's attention like that is because the way that music works basically is that there are two types of tension and release. There's rhythmic tension, and then there's harmonic tension. Well, the melodic tension, I guess, you could think of that as a thing too. But syncopation, right, is what generally like really gets your attention, right? It's sort of like the sugar in the candy. I mean, without syncopation, you have some pretty stiff, bland music generally. White person music, uh, and so and then also you have tension tones. So you have very stable tones that are um, consonant, and then you have these unstable tones that are dissonant. And some tones are more dissonant than others. Chord tones are very stable, and they're also where you get the melody. So if you really know what you're doing, there are approach notes. There are neighbor tones, all these things. They're very close to the stable tones. And if you play them in the right way, it's creating constant tension. So in most rock music, you don't use a lot of outside notes. They're just all the basic notes, like you're playing the 5 note scale. This is why, you know, when people that listen to Zeppelin and stuff, they think that Jimmy Page is the greatest guitarist that ever lived. And they have no idea that Garcia was playing like, you know, light years beyond that guy. I mean, he was playing the same 5 notes in the same pattern that every blues guitarist ever did. It's very basic, simple stuff consisting of mostly the same handful of notes, usually just like 3 notes and then a little bit of the other two, right? And every now and then a flat 5. But Garcia was constantly playing the notes between the notes. So there were constantly all these chromatic tension tones, tension, tension, release, tension, release, tension, release. So, you know, if you have like Jimmy Page, he might go like or something, you know, but it would probably actually sound more like right, but it's just basic 5 note blues. Um, Garcia would play all the chromatic. So you hear that? It's like all the notes. So you pick 2 chord tones and you play all the notes, right? And so you get really good at it. And Garcia was constantly using all 12 tones of the scale. So there's this constant tension and release because he knew how to very tastefully use all of these tension tones and then resolve them constantly. So your ear is just constantly engaged, like all the time. In fact, when you're creating melodies, right, you usually are going to stick to the notes within a key. But this, for example, that's all 12 notes of the chromatic scale. So that was all 12 notes that you could possibly play, but not one of them sounds like I played outside of the key. Oh, well, I mean, Garcia used every psychedelic known to man. I mean, they were smoking DMT in 1964 or something. I mean, way before anyone had fucking heard of it. You have to remember that the Bay Area is like the most progressive place in the world with the most high IQ. It's the most high IQ San Francisco, the most high IQ zip code in the world, I think, or maybe somewhere in China, but it's up there. It's definitely the highest IQ zip code in the United States. Um, so you had the most intelligent, advanced, hip people that were at the cutting edge of everything, and everyone's rich as hell, like everyone. So all the Grateful Dead's parents basically were upper middle class, or in Weir's case, actually wealthy. So they had like no reason to get a job, nothing, total like basically infinite resources. And then they were surrounded by all the most brilliant, talented people you could possibly imagine. It really is just like unbelievable to try to imagine being in their shoes during that period. And it's like all these zombies were the 1950s, right? And then all of a sudden they have LSD and rock music and yoga, and you know what I mean? Like it just like, and suddenly they're super aware, super conscious, but almost everyone on the entire planet is still totally asleep. I mean, those few years where it was only like a small little cluster of people that had this consciousness, it must have been just the most extraordinary thing, especially considering that they had access to all their friends' parents' mansions. I mean, Olumpalai it was built by a Indian chief that got really, really rich, and it was like a 22-room mansion in Northern California, right up north of San Francisco. And it had a huge pool. And at one point, Jefferson Airplane, the Grateful Dead, and Big Brother and the Holding Company, and the Loving Spoonful, I think, were all living together in this like gigantic mansion in the woods in north of San Francisco. There's psilocybin mushrooms in the fall growing all over the lawns everywhere. I can't even imagine the kind of bliss and freedom. The first few years, LSD wasn't even illegal, so they didn't even have any paranoia. Um, so there's only 8 of us left. Uh, are any of you guys Deadheads? Because if you name a Dead song, there's almost 100% chance that I know how to play it. And I can hang out for maybe 15 more minutes before. I'm really excited to get the OBS going because it's really going to allow me to make much more high quality streams. This stream would have been a lot better if when I spoke about the wall of sound, I could have pulled up a picture of it. And so after tonight, I will have those capabilities. In fact, my future live streams may not ever again be free, because what I'm going to do is make my live streams for patrons only, and then I'm just going to put highlights for the public, because I've been demonetized for a year and I have to find ways to try to get some compensation for all of this work, right? So, Dark Star. I just went straight to the crazy spacey shit in the middle of the song. You're not supposed to do that for like 30 minutes, but I don't have that much time. Okay, the battery is almost dead. Those Scarlet Begonias. Morning Dew is actually one that I don't know. Let's see if I could actually just think about it. Walk me out in the morning dew, my honey. That's close, right? I mean, yeah, it's just a 1-4-5, right? And then there's the other part. And I know it goes to F at some point, but yeah, you got me with that one. Let's see. Yeah, okay, the other one. Oh no, in E. Okay, so let's see, what's another one? Loser. Oh, I can't remember. What's is that? Old man down. No, that's Wharf Rat. Huh? Shit. What is Loser? I can't even remember how that song sounds. That's crazy that I can't remember Loser, man. Yeah, you guys are getting me with some of these Mexicali blues. I could play if I had the chord chart. Let's see. Scarlet Begonias, though, of course. From the other direction, she was caught in mine. But I might as well try, I might as well try. The solo, let's see if I can do that. Something to that effect. Iko Iko, Uncle John's Band, Fire on the Mountain, the other one, Loser. Man, why can't I remember how Loser goes? How does it go? Um, Something about gambling. Iko Iko, I don't, man, maybe not that one either. Iko Iko, I should be able to just play that, but it's really similar to Franklin's Tower. Franklin's Tower. Uncle John's Band. Let's see. Well, the first days are the hardest days. Don't you worry anymore. Sort of, yeah. I don't know that one super well. Man, you guys did get me on a couple of them. I'm surprised also that I cannot remember what Loser sounds like even at all. Katie May is not a Grateful Dead song. That's a Bob Dylan song, I think, or something. But that's not actually the Dead. Um, Man, how the fuck does Loser go? Why can't anyone tell me? Oh yeah, something about you can look the whole world around and you'll never find another honest man. Man, yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up now and try to fucking figure it out because Touch of Grey, yeah. Let's see. Oh, if you're just dialing in, you have dialing in. Listen to my '90s ass. Jesus Christ. If you're just tuning in, no, that's also pretty '90s. What do you do now? We're It's just kind of devolved into just a sitting around in the living room with our feet up on the table kind of situation. But it was a pretty good live stream, so you should go back to the beginning and check it out. Ooh, had to get another guitar because I broke a string. Okay, Touch of Grey. Let's see. Something like that. I don't really remember. But I have to look up Loser, man. I know I said I was going to do all this off the top of my head, but you got me with that one. Loser chords. Oh, right. Yeah. Okay, I remember this song now. If I had a gun for every ace I've drawn, record on the town the size of Babylon. Yeah, okay. So yeah, there's that one. I just had to look that up and see what the hell. Okay, so what else have we got here? Um, Sugar Magnolia. Um, yeah, that one should have a little distortion, right? Oh man, yeah. And then the ending part is let's see. Sunshine Daydream. All right. Okay. So what else? Casey Jones or Garcia's part. Um, China Cat. Or Weir's part is oh wait, that's also Garcia's part. Playing in the band.